what a high honor it is to continue to delve into a generation well before mine that was built on just a lack of conformity and the idea of playing skiffle music, the idea of picking up instruments and playing from your soul and playing what you felt and really going for it and letting it all hang out, not playing it safe. A lot of this had to do with the fact that there was legal LSD floating around all over the world, and in this humble host's opinion, a lot of square cats unknowingly got dosed, and in some way, with the occasional bad trip, that was a really good thing for society because a lot of square people got dosed and really opened them up to ego deflation and sort of maybe taking what they do seriously, but not taking themselves that seriously. And I don't expect things to go. History doesn't exactly repeat itself, but we're at a point now in civilization where we do need a collective raising of consciousness if we are going to continue to prosper at some level. I get a chance today to speak to somebody who's right in that milieu, decorated musician from Strawberry Alarmclock, George Bunnell. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, Jake. Quite an introduction.
Well, I have to ask you right off the bat. I mean, were you part of any jug bands?
Well, what's really funny is the guy that wrote Incense and Peppermints.
Yeah.
Also, he wrote Acapulco Gold for the Rainy Days.
Wow.
And it's a skiffle kind of thing. And jug band, very much so.
I'm just trying to, you know what I'm trying to figure out?
Waddle doddle doodle doodle.
You know what I'm trying to figure out is because before, you're really one of the pioneers of sort of this explosion of psychedelic rock music in the States, and I have to assume that you were. Where did you grow up in Southern California?
Yeah.
So I mean,
I was born in Massachusetts.
Right. I'm just curious. When you got out there, were you going to the Ash Grove? Were you checking out Taj?
Yes.
Okay. Can you talk about those early jug band scenes with Barry the Fish Melton and Taj?
Barry sent me a happy birthday thing yesterday.
Dude, honestly, Barry is like he's been a conduit for me. I mean, at 47 years old, I mean, for your generation to open up the sort of just be accessible. Anyway, I love the Fish, man. And it was revelatory to me in one of our interviews that he was playing playing jug band music with Taj back in the day.
Yeah. I got to meet Taj Mahal, but not through the Ash Grove thing. It was later. I had moved to Encinitas, California, down San Diego County, North County.
Sure.
And he was a neighbor. And
Wow.
I met him and Jack Temption kind of basically at the same time. I walked into the local music store to just get myself acquainted with the local music store. And the town, it only had 2,500 people in it at the time. This was 1973. And there he was. It was Taj Mahal, and then he played at the local thing called the La Paloma Theater, which was a great theater to see bands in. It didn't have seats. It had, like, you laid on the floor, sort of, but it was all padded carpet, and you kind of laid down and watched the show, and it was all up at an angle so that you could watch, and it was really an unusual theater. But anyway, I digress.
No, that's cool. I mean, it's such a nice.
The Ash Grove. Yeah. A friend of mine, his name is David Gluck. I write songs with him, and we used to go down there and see Doc Watson and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. We were kind of into the country blues thing, maybe more than the jug band thing. Although we would see, like, we saw the Firesign Theater there and all kinds of neat things.
Oh, I love it. I mean, that was percolating at that time, and it's just so funny because we lost this legendary cat, obviously, Sly Stone, and I just remember
Yeah.
back in the day, I did about 4 interviews with David Lindley, and he talked about seeing Sly in the studios in L.A. when he was just a radio DJ. Do you have memories of Sly Stone? Did you cross paths with him?
No, we didn't.
I'm curious about, like, sort of as it relates to you, if you could just talk about essentially the lack of curriculum, the lack of codified music at that time. I mean, there were no books. We weren't saturated with visual information. We were essentially an auditory learning society. And so I'm curious about, did you learn music by ear? Were you an ear-trained musician? And can you just talk about your view of the skiffle mentality?
Okay, so for me, I'm kind of a cross between the two things. So I took formal bass lessons, and they were jazz bass lessons. But I started off as I forget how old I was, 7 years old or 8 years old, on violin, and in school, and but I didn't, because my idea of violin was I wanted to play fiddle. But the only access I had was to play violin in school. They give you the instrument, and then you play the shows, the Christmas show, the Easter show. And all these
Yeah,
things.
no, dude,
And
you were locked.
I was sitting there playing Jingle Bells.
I did.
And that's not what I wanted to do.
No, you wanted to be Vassar Clemens, dude.
Yeah. I wanted the thing to move. I wanted to go.
Wow.
And it wasn't going to happen. It was just like, here, this is your part. You play when this happens. I'm reading it. I learned to read as a kid, and then it was treble clef, of course. And then I told my teacher I didn't really like the violin, and she said, well, let's move you to viola, and it's got a nicer, warmer sound, and it's a little bigger, and maybe you'll like that. So I tried that for a couple of weeks, and that still was not. I liked it in a way, but I didn't want to continue with it. And then so I told my mom, and she goes, well, why don't you just get into the choir, or into the glee club, it was called. And I said, okay. So I did that. I was in like chorus and choir and glee club. And then I said, I want to play music. And she goes, well, why don't I'm Italian. And so she goes, well, why don't you play accordion like your cousin, like Gino? And I said, okay. So I go to school, and I get an accordion. So I start learning how to play the accordion.
Oh my gosh. This is unbelievable.
And I was now 9 years old or something. And so I walked to school, but it was California, so it was no big deal, and it was maybe a mile, but and it was beautiful all the time. So, but the only problem was I had to carry this accordion in its case, and it was heavy, it was big, and so that eventually deterred me from that whole thing, and then I just went back to the singing thing, and the whole time I really wanted to play something or other. And by that, eventually this kid on the block, he got a guitar, but he only had like 4 strings on it. And they were the 4 low strings on the guitar.
Right.
And so, and we were not in a rich neighborhood, obviously. And so it was like, he couldn't get new strings. Anyway, so we all kind of took turns playing this thing, and we all took turns playing, like, we had sticks on hubcaps and stuff like that. It was funny stuff, and so I eventually got really into the idea of playing the bass parts of songs, and we all learned how to keep a beat and everything like that. And there were, I don't know, 4 or 5 of us on the block that all kind of were gravitating towards the music, but I think there was only me and my other neighbor and his name was Mike Holman. But I moved out of the neighborhood, and then later, our band, way later, we were doing a show in the 80s, and I forget what, it might have been 1987. I think it was a Summer of Love 20-year reunion thing. And our Summer of Love, by the way, was 1967, not 1969.
Right. That's it's funny you said that, because John Cipollina's younger brother Mario, he played in Huey Lewis and the News, among other things, but he was 13 in 67, and he was putting LSD, liquid eye drops, in his eyes during orchestra practice. He said the conductor's baton started to look like a fan blade. But that was 60.
I wouldn't even ever do that. God.
60. But you're right. 67 was before the invasion. So go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, later I'm doing this concert with the Alarm Clock, and it's this Summer of Love thing, and we're at San Jose State, and it was the bands were It's a Beautiful Day, Moby Grape, Fraternity of Man, and Strawberry Alarm Clock.
Wow.
Well, yeah. So I'm up on stage for sound check. So I'm standing there, and the bass player from It's a Beautiful Day, which is Mitchell Holman, he comes up to me and he goes, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And I said, I know you're Mitchell Holman, because he was, he's the guy that he plays a stand-up electric bass in It's a Beautiful Day. And he goes, "It's Mike. I'm Mike Holman from the neighborhood." I was like, "Oh no!"
Oh my gosh! Way back when.
Yeah, he was a little younger than me, and his brother and sisters were all real close friends of mine. We were neighbors, and like actual, like, one house over kind of thing. And we hung out every day. And as a matter of fact, Mitchell and I used to, like, they had a tree in their front yard, and it had black ants. We used to touch the black ants with our finger and eat them. And they were tangy. It was the weirdest thing.
Oh, you guys were already psychedelicized. I mean, I have to ask you, George. I have to ask you, George. Did you get the chance to play, like, Italian weddings with the accordion?
No, my cousin did, though. Lots of them.
Because I just know that, like, what was so cool about the blue collar Italian streak of the 60s, I remember talking to George Garzone, the great sax player, and he came up in Cleveland with Joe Lovano, and dude, he was in his Uncle Rocco's pizza shop, and they're flipping pizza pies, and he's playing, they're yelling at him to play bebop, and to me it was such a, but you essentially, when you talk about jazz bass, you're talking about Leroy Vinegar, Red Callender, Charlie Mingus. Who were some of your influences on jazz bass?
Ray Brown.
Yeah.
And Ron Carter. Excuse me. And I got to meet Ray Brown on an airplane. And,
please tell me that story, because honestly, Shelly Manne and Ray Brown are like the deepest souls I've ever. I love both of them. I never met them, knew them, but I love those cats so much, man.
Oh, he was like, he couldn't have been a nicer guy.
Yeah, I know.
And I knew who he was, and then I said I hesitate in telling you that I'm a bass player, but I'm a bass player in a rock band. And he goes, "Well, what band?" And I tell him, Strawberry Alarm Clock, and he's like, "Well, that's fantastic." And he goes, I listened to you guys. I listened to everybody. And
that's so genius, man. That's so, I love, because you always have to keep your ears open. But going back, essentially, when did you first, were you going to the Dragon Wick Club? I know that Charles Lloyd used to play there. I'm curious about some of the, Lindley stood on a stool because he wanted to play upright bass so bad because he was obsessed with Mingus. Were you going to the Peanut Gallery to check out jazz in the early 60s at all, or were you too young?
No, I was too young. I was 18 when our band made it in 1967. I still couldn't go to any clubs.
Well, I'm just curious that but that's true. But there was there was a lot more flexibility. You didn't have, in some of the jazz clubs, you did have that peanut gallery where you could get a Coke and be underage and watch the cats. But and I'm guessing though that were you hip to the acid tests that were going on?
No.
In '65, no. So can you talk about ultimately, this idea of this merging of acoustic to electric instrumentation, and this idea of basically, playing original tunes. And ultimately, how the alarm clock kind of coalesced into a band that could actually sing for their supper.
Yeah, well, so my next door neighbor, his name is Steve Bartek. He is, but he was my next door neighbor. Anyway, we're best friends. I was his best man. He was my best man, and we're still best friends. And he's still in the Strawberry Alarmclock. Wow. But he and I grew up next door to each other, and he played flute. And he was classically trained, but also jazz. He was totally into jazz. And and his brother was into jazz guitar. And the three of us were taking music lessons, actually Steve had a teacher and private lessons. And he had been doing this from like when he was 6 or 8 years old or something. So he was already doing recitals and stuff. He was a prodigy. And, he later became the lead guitar player and producer of Oingo Boingo.
Wow.
And he's Danny Elfman's orchestrator. He's done every single movie that Danny Elfman composed the score for. Anyway, so... Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So Steve and I and his brother and our other neighborhood kid named Ron McIntyre, and Steve's brother is Jim Bartek. The four of us had this little jazz instrumental band, but I was 14, Steve was 11.
This is the greatest start. But you guys were playing were you playing like Birth of the Cool jazz or bebop?
No, we were doing Desafinato. And
I love, dude, you're killing it right now.
That kind of stuff, walking bass and
jazz samba stuff. Yeah,
and Girl from Ipanema and those kinds of things. But we couldn't really sing, so nobody wanted to hear little kids singing, and so we just played instrumental. But we had a ringer. We had Steve could play the melodies on the flute. And then we started to eventually turn it into kind of like learning some of the rock songs, but we still couldn't sing, and so it was kind of we found the idea of harmony, and so we discovered that if we put 2 or 3 voices together, it sounds okay. It passes, and so. We started to delve into that, but it wasn't until like a couple of years later when like the British invasion started to happen, and then we were really getting influenced by that and Donovan and all that kind of stuff.
Sure, no, like Eric Burden and the Animals and stuff.
Yeah, and I later got to be friends with Eric. And wow. But we loved the Animals. We loved Donovan. We loved the Yardbirds and the Who.
Right.
So we were like that. And then we also liked the Beatles and the Stones. We didn't have a preference over one person over the other, but we were like major Who fans and major Yardbirds fans because we tended towards that wackiness. And
I want to be clear. This is so important for history, for my generation and older. Outside of, I've interviewed, Mountain Girl, who was, Jerry Garcia's wife for a while. I mean, they talk about getting the name the Grateful Dead in San Jose one night when the Stones were in town, and basically the British rock groups. There was no American. It was the American breed. Were there any like psychedelic rock groups prior to the British invasion that could, I mean, out, in America? Like, because, I mean, I know about Jim Kweskin Jug Band. Obviously, we know about, there was a lot of, like, Dylan plugging in at Newport. Strawberry Alarm Clock didn't birth till 1967. Was there any psychedelic rock prior to the Creams and the Yardbirds and the Burdens and the Yeses and the Who's?
It's a good question.
I mean, it is. It is because you're deep. You're psychedelicized, but you're still totally all there, and it's like, it's so interesting to hear. It just sort of piqued my interest because people have told me countless stories about the British invasion, but now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, was there any group doing? Not, and I'm, obviously I'm not talking about surf music. I'm just talking about psychedelic rock. I mean, and if you can't come up with a name, that's cool. I'm just trying to. Or were you still in the jazz bag until you heard that British psychedelic music?
Well, we were Beach Boy fans,
right?
And there's a certain amount of psychedelicness in that.
Very psychedelic, but more like beats on the beach, surfing with taking liquid acid or something,
Yeah. There's a certain psychedelicness about them.
It's not that jamming psychedelic, but there's something there.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were very musical and were putting together some really unusual sounds and stuff.
That's true.
But then it's and they were pre-British invasion, but what they did prior was mostly just the Chuck Berry based surf music, but they sure did go into, a lot of their fans thought they took a big left turn, but they didn't. They went into like really great songwriting and whatnot. But anyway, so besides them, it was largely where I am here, my vantage point, it was a lot of surf music, a lot of surf bands. And when you went to, around as see other bands that were playing in whatever little clubs around, or the little halls and stuff, they were all just doing surf music and stuff.
That stuff drives me. No, I mean, so what about that? There was one band called Kaleidoscope with Lindley. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And Paul Lagos on drums. Those guys were out, man, and they were cooking. And I mean, that was like they'd do like Straight No Chaser and into some sort of Baltic tune in 13/7. It was insane.
Yeah, I know. And see, now there's something that's the surf music got to us, and because it was instrumentals,
right?
And that was our deal,
right?
And so we started doing that kind of a thing. We started taking the surf songs like we did Pipeline in 7/4.
Wow.
And we called it Hang 7. But and it was Pipeline. And
wow.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, we just for fun, we talked about it last year, and we said, we never recorded it. Let's record it, because now we have recording studio, access.
Sure.
And so we said, so we went in and did it. We did our arrangement, our little kid arrangement that we had of Pipeline, and did it in 7, and it's really cool.
Dude, I'm loving that. That is such a sophisticated thing, and it just proves that, I mean, musical innovation can happen at any age. Were you, in today's world, George? I mean, just it's so hard because people that are, we're in such a comping society now. I mean, every concert has to be in the jazz context doing the music of Return to Forever, doing the music of Keith Jarrett. It's like it has to be recognizable to put butts in the seats. The ideas of playing, people are doing incredible original conceptual music now, instrumentally, and you go broke doing it. And it's like the idea of society's view of a musician as a profession does not exist anymore. You can pay to play. You can play for the door. And I'm not saying it was great back then, but the cost of living wasn't as high. Was there a discernible point when you were just like, this is my purpose in life, to be a musician, and you saw an opportunity to be able to make a career out of it? Not that you knew where you were going, but it wasn't like, oh, don't do that. Do something. Get a real job. Was there anything like that for Brother Bunnell?
Well, yeah. So for us, especially Steve Bartek and I, we started writing songs is what ended up happening with our little jazz thing. And
I need to hear tapes of this stuff, by the way. Do you have tapes of this?
Of the songs?
No, of the young unbridled cats playing jazz, dude. This is what I want to hear.
Oh yeah, no, I don't. That would be Well, you know what?
I bet you must have been taping it on a little, Wolin sack or something.
Yeah, we did. We did make little funny tapes, but you know what we used to do? We used to make really weird tapes. We used to do these stop-go things. So you'd record like about 2 seconds, stop it, and then get ready to play something completely different, and then record that right next to it, and then keep doing it until you had like a 3-minute thing of things going by, all kinds of
right.
crazy.
I mean, no, you were. I mean, you didn't even know this, but I mean, up in Stanford, I wrote a whole book on the Merry Pranksters. I mean, Ken Kesey and Ken Babs were doing that kind of stuff. Smoke a joint, lay on the floor. I mean, they was just crazy. Anyway, continue. So I'm just curious about this idea of. I mean, it's so funny because even. I'm going through one of my interviews with Greg Arico yesterday, the original drummer from Sly, and he even said at the beginning of Sly, I mean, before they were ever known or anything, he wasn't sure. He's like, should I bail on this or should I stick it out?
Oh, well, yeah. See, now
Yeah.
So we started. We got our first gig, and when you do that, when you get your first gig, and you get paid for, and
right, it's a gig. Yeah.
I think we made like $10 or $12 or something that we split, and it was at the Calabasas Women's Club.
Oh, I love this.
Here in Calabasas, and we played outdoors on the lawn for the women, and we were on the lawn, and it was sloped, and everything was sloping, and anyway, we were so stoked and all we did were instrumentals, and
this is great.
They were having tea and whatnot, and so
I just also want to be clear. I want to be clear. This was a drummerless quartet, right?
No,
you had a drummer. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was drums, bass, guitar, and flute.
Oh my, this is the hippest band around.
It was really funny. and then
so they're drinking tea and you make $10 or $12.
Yeah, and so then after we left it, we were like, yeah, that's awesome. And so we just started rehearsing all the time and writing, and it really set us into that motion. And then by the time, I was 14 then, so we kept writing and writing and writing, and Steve was 11, and so by the time I was 17 or 8, I was 17. It was just before I turned 18, and Steve was like 15 or 14 and a half or something, and by that time, I was in a band at high school. So then, because my next door neighbor band kind of, it's kind of in the background. It kind of got, because I was going to school with a bunch of other musicians and stuff that I met. And, but in those days, and it was 1964, 5, 6, there were only like 3 bands in the whole school. And or maybe 4, and one of the guys was Mike Monarch from Steppenwolf.
Wow!
And then there was the guys from the Electric Prunes. And Mark Tulin was a friend of mine. He was the bass player of the Electric Prunes.
Yes. And wow, this is insane.
Yeah, this was our high school, and so I'm starting to play music with all these different guys and having fun. But then Steve and I kept writing, and then Randy, our drummer from the Alarmclock, he had come into town from by this time it was like we were in the 11th grade, I think, and he had come in from Riverside, and he was like this hot jazz drummer that played vibes and everything.
Dude, I saw this video of you and him last night. I was like, this dude looked like it was like some combination of Buddy Rich and Hal Blaine put together. I didn't know what was going on. It was, yeah. I mean, dude, not that anybody would be mistaking Strawberry Alarmclock for, Sonny Rollins or anything, but it's like that's what made you guys very different from the quote unquote surf bands of the time. You were definitely.
We could open up.
You could.
We had musicianship. So, because we all knew music.
Exactly.
So we could actually rip.
So Randy came into town. He's playing vibes. You guys
He was the hot guy. He first. So our guitar. One of our guitar players, his name is Randy Zacuto. He went on to found Mighty Mike Guitars, and he went on to become Jackie Lomax's guitarist and everything. Anyway, Randy was teaching at this music store down the street called Woodlow Music, and Randy Seal went in there to get a job teaching drums. And so he met Randy, and then Randy goes, "Oh, why don't you come and play with our band?" And we had a drummer, and his name is Bruce Hubbard, and he's still a friend of ours. And we actually just did another record. The recording that we did of Pipeline is with Bruce Hubbard last year, and we did another thing. We're we just did 2 Beatles songs we're doing a new album. And we're about 8 songs in.
Dude, I love this enthusiasm. It's out of control, man.
Oh, well, we just did 2 Beatles songs. We did Day Tripper, but it's an instrumental, and we did it in 11. And then...
Oh, my God, I love this.
Yeah, it's really funny. You know what I did? It was just one day I was sitting there with the riff of Day Tripper, the syncopated riff, and I thought, let me try putting all the notes together with the same value, with no syncopation in it. So it came out of da 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 da, and it turns out there's 11 of the notes in that riff. So when you keep doing it over and over, you're in 11/8. And you got to hang on for dear life.
Oh my God!
Yeah, so that's what we did. It's on our new album. We recorded it, and then we did Within You, Without You, George Harrison's thing, and with electric sitars and stuff, and it's in 5/8, and. Yeah, you would love it,
dude. I'm going to need to get my ears. I mean, you're opening up a whole new. You're opening up a whole new portal for me right now. All right, so I mean, this is the thing. You, so explain to me the band that was in high school, and then ultimately how that merged into the Alarmclock.
Okay, so in high school we rehearsed every day. And that was the key to it. We started, like, for me personally, I used to have dreams of shaking my head on stage with long hair, and I didn't have long hair yet. And I used to think, I used to have these visions of making it. but I didn't know how real they were.
Sure.
And so I was an art major, and so my mom, by the time I was in the 12th grade, my mom enrolled me into Chenard Art School at Cal Arts. And I was going to be a design artist and stuff. And so I was into odd looking stuff. But anyway, that was so I didn't really have both feed into the idea that music was going to be the thing to make a living with. I kind of had this, backup plan, but it wasn't a very good backup plan. But I did study architecture and whatnot in school, but just in case. And anyway, so we used to rehearse, though, every day, and we really did want to get better than everybody else. And we were really into the idea of being really tight and kind of bombastic and doing, our own ideas and stuff, and then writing our own stuff. And, funny thing is, a lot of the alarm clock stuff that Steve and I wrote had, like Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow and...
I love that tune, man.
Well, those things... Okay, so Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow, for example, Steve and I were in his mom's house. We were in Steve's bedroom, and he used to like to read the dictionary and the encyclopedia every day.
Right.
And so we would learn things and learn words and then learn about certain things. Well, we got into this whole thing about the rainforest and if you were lost in the forest, what kind of mushrooms to look for to survive on and that kind of thing. Well, that's what happened. That song happened out of that whole thing. And I was probably 16 at the time, and Steve was probably almost 14, like 13 and a half. And by that time, he had started playing guitar. And so we were both sitting there and both playing guitar, actually, and writing these songs. And we would sit with the chords. We would develop we would invent our own chords for the songs. At least we thought we were. And we were finding different voicings is basically what it was. Different positions, like to play an E major 7th chord, like up on the 7th fret instead of some other way. And have open strings. We were really into the idea of open strings, and I liked playing bass using open strings, but playing up, on the neck, but having the other strings be part of the riffs or whatever that were open strings. Anyway, and it gave us it almost was, like a lot of bands like Buffalo Springfield and a lot of the bands, the Dillards and the Birds,
right.
They used tunings, which is another way to be able to sort of just strum kind of openly, and it kind of eliminated all the wrong notes. Whereas our thing was a little different. We knew the wrong notes. I mean, and we would use the wrong notes.
Yeah, there are no wrong notes,
Exactly.
Yeah.
We loved that part of it. So we didn't want the tuning. We wanted to play within the whole thing. And it was like a playground for us. And so that is how we did it. But we would write these things, and then Steve and I would sit back and forth, and I'd come up with a line like, whatever it was in Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow, colors green, brown, and yellow, wonder if they'll turn black ever, that kind of stuff. And then we would trade half line by half line to each other, facing each other, and figuring out melodies and chords to go with it. And, it's really funny. Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow, now moving again a couple of years up, I was on tour with the Beach Boys, but the other band on the tour, we did 2 tours with them, and the other band was Buffalo Springfield.
Wow.
And and Neil Young really liked Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow. And so he used to, like, after the gigs, we all had the top floor hotel, and we'd all go around and jam with each other, and we had acoustic guitars to play with. And he would always have me come over and play Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow so he could jam on it. And then a couple of years after that, he came out with Down by the River, which has the verses, you take my hand and I'll take, is the same melody as, whatever, Rainy Day Mushroom Pillow.
Yeah, you're telling me Neil Young, that is unbelievable.
It is really funny. And my friend, when I first heard his song, my friends went, "Dude, that's your song." And I would like, well, he countrified it, but he turned it into a rock thing. But it's like, and I said, yeah, but it goes different. He goes into a different, and then they go, yeah, but those verses they're like almost identical. And I said, yeah. And they go, you got to sue him. And I went, hey, I'm not suing Neil Young. And so that was a really funny thing.
I just want to ask you, before you go on, did you go to the Nashville West at all? Did you know Gene Parsons and Clarence White and those cats?
No, but we were always sort of adjacent.
You were adjacent to those cats. Yeah, no, because you talk about gravitating to country blues. I guess they were doing more psychedelic country, less blues. I don't know. You were adjacent to them,
Yeah, well, another band that was in our high school, they were called the Rose Garden.
Wow.
Do you remember that band?
Well, no, I was born in 1978. I don't remember Rose Garden, dude.
Okay, well, yeah, they had, what was their big hit? They had a big hit. Anyway, if you Google it, you'll see Rose Garden.
I just want to be clear. The Strawberry Alarm Clock came out. A guy from Iron Butterfly came out from your high school. And then Rose Garden.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not Iron Butterfly, Electric Prunes.
Prunes, yeah.
Steppenwolf, the Prunes.
Steppenwolf, that's what I meant. Steppenwolf, yeah.
Yeah, the Rose Garden and then Oingo Boingo, and the Go-Go's, and there's a bunch of them. But and the Knack. One of our close friends was Bruce Gary, the drummer from the Knack. And,
oh my God.
Yeah, he went to Taft also, and he played with us. I've done a couple of recordings with him, quite a few actually, with him and with my friend Randy Zacuto. Zacuto did the Jackie Lomax albums, and then
did Rose Garden do Next Plane to London?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Yes, so they were real close friends.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, and then John Noreen, who played guitar in that band, he played a 12-string like the Byrds did.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they were. When we were in high school, they were called the Blokes. And they primarily did Byrds songs. And
oh my God, this is great.
And they did them really good. And then they got a girl singer. And that's when they did that record. And they changed their name to the Rose Garden. But John Noreen moved to Nashville, and he became a pedal steel player. And, extraordinarily great pedal steel player. And,
because those, I don't remember.
He was in the band called Jack Daniels. Or Highway 101 with Jack Daniels. And,
wow.
Yeah, he was in so... I
was gonna say because he didn't. Did Noreen want getting ensconced in the Nashville studio scene just because? I'm thinking about Lloyd Green and some of these other steel drum cats here, steel pedal steel players. Noreen doesn't jump off the mat. He was more of a live player.
Yeah, probably. Well, I think he's done a lot of recording, but he was in that band, Highway 101.
Right.
They had a few albums. But mainly they were touring all over the place.
So really, the four, 66, you're talking Alarm Clock. I'm just talking about the Forerunners, because, we just lost Sly, but Sly didn't really get on the map till 67, 68. Neither did Jefferson Airplane, 67, 68. That was the Bay Area. The Dead, Quicksilver, Sons of Champlin. But down in your neck of the woods, it was really Buffalo, Springfield, the Byrds.
And Moby Grape were actually down here.
Moby Grape was down. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they get called San Francisco. They have adopted them up there because they had moved up there later to Santa Cruz. But yeah, and we know a whole bunch of the Santa Cruz people. But
wow, yeah, Jerry Miller and those cats were down in Southern.
They were in L.A.
Wow,
yeah.
wow, unbelievable.
Yeah, what's his name? What's his name? One of their guitar player singers. His mom was Loretta Young.
Whoa.
The actress.
Whoa.
And he lived, there's a house here called the Doheny Mansion in Beverly Hills. He grew up in that house.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they were anything but they were no broke, band. I played bass for Bob Mosley, the bass player, did an album that Stephen Stills was producing, and I don't think nothing ever came of it. But we were living in San Diego at the time, and me and my band from high school, the Randy Zacuto and Fred Schwartz, and not Randy Seal. I forget who was playing drums, but anyway. We went in the studio and recorded. And Bob Mosley was the Moby Grape bass player, but he wanted me to play bass on his songs.
Wow.
He liked my approach to his songs. And I kind of was, with his songs, they were really fun. He had this song called Doctor, Doctor, and it was, and I was not slap bass. It was, I used to hit the low strings and with my hand, and make really a cool sound. And when you record it popped through.
Oh.
Anyway, yeah, it was cool. And he loved that kind of thing. He loved that I was just free to do whatever. I didn't have any kind of restrictions.
Right, you were making up the rules. I love it.
Yeah. And so. That was the funnest part of being a Strawberry Alarmclock member, was that there were no real rules, and the whole idea was experimenting. And in the studio, we experimented, and we were free to we had poetic license to express ourselves, and it was all okay. And if you had an idea, for whatever, bring it up. Don't keep it to yourself, Did you, everybody.
I mean, was the, a lot of times, were you guys, it's always interesting to me because, you guys obviously, the record companies were awash with money. They were handing out opportunities for people to make a record. Obviously, you guys caught fire and made a ton of records in the late 60s. But would you say that your live performances were very different? Did they stretch out more? I mean, to me, did certain songs lend themselves to longer improvisation than what, maybe more radio-friendly Strawberry Alarmclock albums portend?
It depended on what the live show was. If we were on with big name acts, our set was always limited. They go, okay, you got 30 minutes. That's
so
how
if you were you were on Steve Miller or one of the, if you were opening, they'd truncate your set, but you wouldn't then go out and play one song for 30 minutes or two songs or anything like that.
No, but we used to do, World's on Fire, which was a song that on the first Alarmclock album, it's 8 minutes long.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we do open up on it. And whenever we played it live, and we still do, because it's fun. We play at the Whiskey A Go Go, and right now our band has 5 guys that played on the very first Strawberry Alarmclock album.
That is some of the most that's one of the most inspirational things I've heard in a long time.
Isn't it good?
That's awesome.
And we're best friends. It's really funny.
That's freaking amazing.
We even fight like we always did. It's like everything's the same. We write the same way too. We sit around and come up with craziness, and like those Beatles songs that we've just recorded. They're funny. Anyway, what I should tell you is, so in high school, so our band got really good and tight, and we were like the premier band all of a sudden in our high school, which was in Woodland Hills. And then there was another band that was not a rival band. They were across town, and they were in Glendale and Burbank, and we ended up, well, I think what happened first was that our drummer, Randy, because he was going around auditioning he auditioned with the Electric Prunes and other bands when he first came to town. Besides being our drummer, he was still out there trying to get gigs with other bands. And so he had gotten his name over to that side of town, to their manager, and he was, as a drummer, but he was also a vocalist, a harmony guy, and he was really good at it. And he worked with this vocal coach, and somehow or another he got, I don't know exactly how they joined hands, but the manager of this other band in Glendale, his name was Bill Holmes, he heard what Randy can do, and he wanted Randy to come over and help out the alarm clock with vocals. Now, they had just recorded the instrumental track to Incense and Peppermints, but one other thing happened in the interim was there was a gig. And he said, we need another band. Can your band play with our band? So their band was called the Sixpence. My band at the time was called Waterford Train. And Waterford Train was FYRD and TRAENE. And so they asked us to play at this party, and because the party, they wanted to have 2 bands that alternated songs, or alternated sets. Right. And so we said, yeah, it was a gig, and so Randy got us a gig. We were like stoked. Anyway, so we met all the guys in the Sixpence, and Randy was, we didn't care. He was going to go over there and do their vocals and stuff. Well, their drummer, he played at the party, but their drummer, his girlfriend, their drummer was named Gene Gunnels. He had already played on the track of Incense and Peppermints, but it wasn't Incense and Peppermints yet. It was still an instrumental that they wrote, that Mark White's the keyboard player, and Ed King, their guitar player. Ed King was famously later in Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Yeah, dude, that dude was a beast, man.
Yeah, he's great. Anyway, so they had written this instrumental, and they had recorded it with Gene on drums and cowbell, famously again. Mm-hmm. And then Mark Watts played farfisa, organ, and grand piano, and Ed King played acoustic and electric guitar and bass. And their bass player couldn't figure out how to play the song. Anyway, and they tried to teach him. Ed tried to teach him the part, but he couldn't learn it. And he eventually did. But anyway, so they had only that. And they had the producer that they had a producer, and they had been releasing singles. But anyway, the producer heard this instrumental and said, I have a writer named John Carter, and John Carter was from the Rainy Days, and he had written Acapulco Gold, which was a skiffle song. And it was a hit here in L.A. And he said, and John has a title, just the title, called Incense and Peppermints. And he said, I think that title suits this music to a T. And basically he was right on. It did. And so he said, I'm going to let him finish out the lyrics. And so Frank Slay was the producer. He sent the 2-track tape of the instrumental to John Carter in Denver and had him, figure it out and write the lyrics to it. And so a couple of weeks later, he came back, and by that time, Gene Gunnels, the drummer, his girlfriend said, you have to make a choice between me and the band. That band's not going anywhere, and you've got to get a regular job at McDonald's or I'm leaving you. And so Gene comes to the band and said, guys, I have to quit. So I have to go get a job. So he quits the band after he played on Incense and Peppermints. Well, then they called Randy and they said, Randy, because they were already going to have Randy do the background vocals. And so he comes in there and does all the background vocals. And they said, by the way, do you want to be the drummer? Because Gene quit. And he goes, yeah. And so then he goes, but I want my bass player for my band. And our guitar player and flute player, Steve Bartek. And they said, well, okay, well, and he goes, well, they have a bunch of songs. And they said, oh, okay, so have them come over and play the songs. So we go over there, Steve and I, with Randy, to their rehearsal, to the Sixpence rehearsal, and play them all of our songs, which, I don't know, we had 12 or 15 or whatever. Anyway, we played all our songs, and Ed and Mark were the decision makers. They go, yeah, let's do them all. So they started learning them all, and they had a regular job on the weekends in Santa Barbara at a pizzeria called Dino's. And so I started going up to Dino's with Randy on the weekends and listening to them do my songs. Steve was still too young to go up on the weekends. Anyway, so then they said they got a record deal. They had already released Incense on their own label, All American, and they only got it played in Santa Barbara, but it became the most requested song.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the DJ said, here's a bunch of DJs that I know in San Diego, San Bernardino, and da-da-da-da. He goes, take the record there, and they'll play it. So that's what ended up happening. And I was going around with them because at that point, they asked me to come in and start playing bass on the songs in the studio. And the first one, I think, was Worlds on Fire that I did. And they asked Steve to play flute on it, which he did. And then we did Rainy Mushroom Pill, and they said, well, you got to play that bass part. Our bass player will never be able to figure that out. So I played bass on it, and then they said, well, you know the harmonies, so why don't you do the harmonies? So I did, and then Steve played flute on it. And then they said, well, can you guys be in the band? And I had just turned 18 in June of, like yesterday was my birthday, but
happy birthday!
Thanks. And I had just turned 18, and so we went home, Steve and I, and said they want us to be in the band. And my mom goes, "No, you're going to Chenard Art School, and you're not going anywhere on tour." And I go, "Well, they have a bunch of jobs." Excuse me. And she goes, "No, you're not doing it." And so I said, well, I'm 18 now. I can do whatever I want. And then Steve, he asked, and we're next door to each other. Our moms are best friends. And so his mom's like, no, there's no freaking way. You're finishing school. You're in high school, and you're going to go to college for sure. And so his permission wasn't forthcoming. Mine wasn't either. And so, but I took, advantage of being 18. My mom was like, then you have to move out, which was fine. And basically I did, because all we did was go on the road. And
well, listen, George. No, George, I want to ask you something, because I want to. We've got to do set 2. We've been cooking here for an hour.
Oh.
Can we put put a pin in this for a minute and then maybe revisit this like next week? Do set 2 and keep going.
Sure.
That would be great, man. This is totally eye-opening and revolutionary for me.
Yeah. So that's how the band got. That's how.
Yeah,
the
no,
band
I mean,
became
that was I was interested about how in high school you weren't originally in it, but then you wound up, but Steve wasn't 18 yet, right?
No, he was only 15.
But he left too.
No, he stayed home.
All right, we're going to pick it up with Steve at home on set 2.
Yeah, well, I went on tour, and then Steve had to stay home and finish school. But him finishing school, he went to UCLA, got a degree. He got, I think, a master's degree in composition, which is how he is able to be a conductor and a composer. And he's got a huge IMDb database.
He's the Elfman cat.
Yeah, he's done every single movie. He orchestrates and for 100-piece, orchestras.
George Bunnell, it was an honor to connect with you, man. And I'll reach out to you later this week, and we'll set up a time to do set 2.
Okay, and it's actually Bunnell, but I get called Bunnell all the time.
George Bunnell. I always ask my guests that. George Bunnell. Thank you, brother.
All right.
All right, be cool, man.
You too, Jake.
Later,
Thank you.
dude.
Thanks for the call.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah, just let me know when you're ready to do it again.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, be cool.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.